So now we're on Daf Mem Amud Beis, towards the bottom of the Amud, and we're up to Mutar Adam, which is a quote from the Mishnah, and that's about 8 lines up from the bottom. And we said yesterday that the Rabbanon made a gzera of Krovas Chalutzaso, but if there are 2 Yevamot that fell, and he gave Chalitza to only one of them, so he's only prohibited to marry the Krovos of that Chalutza, but he could marry the relatives of the other Yevam, meaning of the Tsar. That's what it says, Mutar Ad. Omer of Tuvi Bar Kisna Omer Shmuel Haba al Tsoras Chalutza Vlad Mams. He gives the following example. Shimon was married to Sarah and Rivka, and Shimon died without children. So Shimon's wives, Sarah and Rivka, need either Yibum or Chalitza. Reuven, the brother of Shimon, gave Chalitza to Sarah. Okay, so Sarah was the Chalutza. And now Reuven wants to marry Rivka, right? Because Shimon was married to 2 wives. So that's an Iser Kares, I think. Or are we going according to Rabbi Akiva and it's only an Iser Lav? So I think what we're assuming now is that we're dealing with a violation of an Iser Kares. So this is actually the sheet of Reish Lakish on Daf Yud. I don't know if you remember the machlokas between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan on Daf Yud. According to Rabbi Yochanan, the Iser Kares is only on the Choletz. Whereas according to Reish Lakish, it's on all the brothers. So once one brother, there may be 50 brothers, but once one brother gives Chalitza, according to Reish Lakish, all the other brothers now are enjoined from a relationship with any of the Yevamis under the Erev of Eishasah, right? Because once the Chalitza was delivered, and the Choletz is sort of a shliach on behalf of all the other brothers, so then they're all enjoined from a relationship with any of the Yevamis with an Iser Kares of Eishasah. So here's a case of Vlad Mamzer. My taima, the Isura Kaima, means she goes back to the Isur of Eishasah. In other words, as long as there was a Zikas Yibum, then the Torah was matter the Isur Eishasah. But now that the Zikas Yibum was removed through Chalitza, and again, it matters not who gave the Chalitza, because he's operating on behalf of all the brothers, he removes the Zikas Yibum, and therefore we go back to the Isur Eishasah because there's no possibility of Yibum. So if there's a relationship with an Eishes Ach, that's a Chiv Kares, then the Vlad is a Mamzer. Now, what about the Cholet himself? Just 1 second. So if I'm not mistaken, again, we have to review the second Daf Yud, but as far as the Choletz and the Chalutza is concerned, that goes down to an Iser Lav. So it's not an Iser Kares. So again, whether the Vlad be a Mamzer would be dependent upon Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim about Ein Kvitzos the Chayvei Lav. That's my impression.
34.
34?
Oops.
Does he bring Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan? Right? Spend it by 4. Even after Chalitza, the Chalitza does not revert, the Chalutza, excuse me, does not revert to her original Erev status. Okay. So again, the union between the brother who performed Chalitza and the Chalutza is only a lav. No, there's no kares, there's no mamzeres. So that's a separate din in Chalutza, but as far as the Saros are concerned, which he calls Kowav, they revert back to the original Erva status, and therefore the offspring is a mam. So Shmuel's ruling is predicated on the assumption that Chalutza, in receiving Chalitza, he says she's not an agent of the other Yevamos, the other Tzara. This corresponds to the view expressed by Rish Lakish. So that's what we said, Rish Lakish. Okay. Omer Rav Yosef, Afanan Nami Tnina. Mutter Odom Bekrovas Soras Chalutzos. Right, so again, let's just go over very quickly. If he gives the example of Shimon was married to 2 wives, we call them Sarah and Rivka, and then Shimon dies without children, and there was Chalitza to Sarah, then, although again, if the Choletz would have a relationship with Rivka, that would be an Isakaris with Mamzerus. But if he would have, but as far as having a relationship with any relatives of Rivka, that he's allowed to do. Okay, then. So that's the Mishnah of Mutar Adam Bekrovas Tsaras Chalutzos, who in this particular scenario is called Rivka. Oh. I Amrit Bishleimat Sarah. Abroi means that she doesn't have the status of a chalutza. Literally, abroi means on the outside. It means that there was only one woman, what do we call a Sarah, who had the status of chalutza, but we don't graft that status of chalutza of Sarah onto Rivka. That's called abra. Now, the Torah says in the case of the chalutza that it downgrades the lav, the avera, from a chiyuv kares to a separate lav. And therefore, that would not be mamzeres. And now we're saying that the tzara is not called a chalutza. And that's why there's mamzeres. If you would have established a status of chalutza to the tzara, no, physically she never got the chalutza, but it means that we're all, working in cahoots. So even though Sarah was the one who actually had the physical chalutza, the chalitza, she's operating on behalf of Rivka, and it's as if Rivka was a chalutza.
If only one.
Wait, just one second. I'm sorry, David. I just missed. My mind just missed one. I want to get this straight. I'm missing just one piece of the puzzle. If we would have said that she's also that the Tzara, meaning Rivka, is also a chalutza. So again, what does it say? So she's not a chalutza. If she's not a chalutza, so since she's not a chalutza, meaning Rivka is not a chalutza, therefore the child is a mom's. You with me on that? Everybody, we get a unanimous vote in favor of my statement. Yeah, what I'm saying is that if Sarah, who received the physical chalitza, is the only chalutza, but Hot Sarah, Rivka, who did not receive chalutza, is not a chalutza, then I understand that a relationship with Rivka would generate mamzerus, meaning that Rivka's status is that of an Eishes Ah. And why is that? Because with regard to the chalutza herself, the Torah says, Im lo yivne, which means that there's a separate lav if you have a relationship with the chalutza. But that doesn't apply to the other tzara if you assume that the other tzara is not a chalutza, but her situation that we've already broken up the zikas yibum, and therefore she goes back to the status of Shizach, and therefore relationship with her is chayv increases, and the vlad is a mouse. But what's the raya that Rav Yosef brings from our Mishnah? Mishum hachi buter ba'chos. We'll come back to that in a second. Elai amrit Sarah kechalutza damya is amai muter. Okay, 1 second. So again, he's allowed to marry the relatives of Rivka. So what does that prove? If we would have said that Rivka or status of a chalutza, why would that impact on the relatives? This is really interesting. It's a certain element of counterintuitive here. What we're saying here is that when the Rabbanan established an Isa the Rabbanan of Krovas Chalutza, it's only on the Chalutza. And now we have to go back and ask, who is the Chalutza? Will the real Chalutza please stand up? So if I'm going to say that that Sarah is the Chalutza and she's the only Chalutza, then I understand why the relatives of Rivka are allowed to get married. He's allowed to marry because she's not a chalutza. And the whole Gzeira D'Rabbanan was on Krovas chalutza. But why do I say it's counterintuitive? Because by saying that Rivka is not a chalutza, you therefore tell me that the Vlad, if he had such a relationship with Rivka, would be a mamzer. So I mean, right, by removing her, meaning Rivka's status of chalutza, you are making the Iser Erva more severe. You're putting on her the status of an Eshesach with the Vlad Mamzer, etc., etc. So really, the fact that Rivka is not a chalutza is a chumrah, but it's a chumrah should maybe they cool, because once you're telling me that she's not a chalutza, which means again with chumrah that she goes back to the status of Eshesach with karis and mamzeres, then you're being mater hakrovos. It's a chumrah shenevim they cool. That's why I say it's a little bit counterintuitive. You start with the chumrah and you end with the cool.
I'm saying that the chalutza, that's when he gives chalutza. The person he gets chalutza to is the one that.
She's the exclusive chalutza. She wears a big ches on her sweatshirt.
So the other sorrow becomes basically the widow.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by the widow, but
she's a widow.
Oh, I know what you mean.
She's
Eishesach.
also-
That's what we call Eishesach, right?
Therefore,
Right. She doesn't have that special status of a chalutza. Now, the special status of a chalutza is a kula and a chumrah. It's a kula because it reduces kares down to a lav of imlo yivneh, but it's a chumrah because we generate the rabbanan and the isra on hakrovos. Now we have to graft that whole discussion onto Rivka, who didn't get the chalitza. And now what we're going to say is that if we remove from Rivka the status of a chalutza, that's going to be a chumrah and a kula. Because if she's not the chalutza, then she's eishesach, or as you call it, the widow, and therefore there's an isakaris. But if she's not a chalutza, then he can marry her relatives, because the Isa D'Rabbanan, the Xavier D'Rabbanan, was only on Krovas chalutzas, when she's not chalutzas. And from the fact that the Mishnah, this is Rav Yosef's brilliance, the fact that the Mishnah says that he can marry the Krovos of Rivka means that she's not a chalutza. And that's going to bring support to what we said in the name of Rav Tovi. What was his name? Rav Tovi, that Abba al Tsaras Chalutzaso is Havlad Mams. So we start with a kula and we end with a chum. Conceptually, it really works the other way. Sequence. The sequence really is that we start with the chumrah and then with the kula, but you can go in either direction. This is the brilliance of Rav Yosef. Wow. Who I think was blind, by the way. But all right, maybe this is before he went blind. Yeah.
It's either one or the other. You move the block being a suffix mouncer.
I guess, I mean, maybe at some point in the sugi you will see that, but right now it's black or white. It's either, in other words, it all comes down to the concept of shlichus, which again, I'm sure there's much more lumdus here than meets the eye, but just on a very superficial, technical level, when Sarah is involved in chalitza, is she operating on behalf of the whole gang, of all the tzaras? Again, that's just, dog for tishkat. That's just a way of remembering the sugya. I'm sure it's much more profound. I mean, you could ask the following question, like, this is a klotzkach. You're familiar with that phrase, klotzkach? You could ask what happens if before the chalitza took place, Rivka came to Sarah and said to her, do me a favor, my beloved Sarah, beloved Sarah, that's a fine phrase. Would you do me a favor and you receive the chalitza? Because I'm not in the mood to do the chalitza, but do it on my behalf. With shlichus operate. I think that's a klotzkach. I don't think the halacha would change kihu zeh, one iota, by what discussion may or may not have taken place between Rivka and Sarah. Right. This would be a Purim term. Because we're dealing here with abstract concepts. There's the Maisa Chalitza, there's the Chalos Chalutza, and the question is where to put the emphasis. If you're going to put the emphasis on the Chalos Chalutza, then what's the difference between Sarah and Rivka? I mean, Sarah just happened to be available for Chalitza, whatever you want to say. But if you're talking about the Maisa Chalitza, that's what's koveh the Shem Chalutza with all the repercussions, both L'Kula and L'Chumra, then the Maisa Chalitza was only on what's that name? Sarah. Not on. So Lema Tevi Tuvta the Rabbi Yochanan. The Omar, what was Rabbi Yochanan's statement? Again, back on Daf Yud. Bein hu, bein ha'achim, ein chayavim, lo al hachalutza kares, v'lo al tzarasa kares. It means that when one ach gives chalitza, he is the shliach, he is the self-appointed shliach on behalf of all the achim, which reduces the lav from kares of Eishes ach down to a separate lav of imlo yivna. Now, I think we have to add another point, though, if I understand the mathematics here. There are two sides to the coin. You could ask one question, then you could ask a second question. But I think the Gemara is equating them. One question you could ask is whether the choletz is operating on behalf of all his brothers. And the second question is whether the chalutza is operating on behalf of all the tzaros. But I think the Gemara equates them. So since Rabbi Yochanan goes on record as saying that the choletz is operating on behalf of all the achim, reducing or downgrading the lav from kares down to an isa lav. So memela, we have to apply that logic to the chalutza side. And that one woman of all the tzaras who received the chalutzas is operating on behalf of all the tzaras, which would mean that haba al tzaras chalutza, right? Haba al tzaras chalutza is haflad kosher, not mamza, because we're dealing with an isa lav. We're not holding back Rabbi Akiva, we're dealing with an isa lav. But that doesn't make sense because the Gemara says lema to heavy tuve to the Rabbi Yochanan. So we're not going to go to Rav Tovi. You can't create a tuve to the Rabbi Yochanan for Rav Tovi, even though he's quoting Shmuel. But rather we have to go back to the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? That mutar adam b'krovas saras chalutzos. Let's see again. What's the Mishnah saying? That he's married now if she's a chalutza. Oh, very good. The Mishnah is against Rabbi Yochanan. Why? Because if you accept Rabbi Yochanan that all the Yevamos, all the tzaros are chalutzos, because one is operating on behalf of all of them, so then each one of them would generate a derabanan of krovas chalutzos. And yet the Mishnah says explicitly, mutar adam b'krovas tzaras chalutzos. So therefore, lema to be tuv to the Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, I guess now is going to defend himself. V'tizbara, I guess v'tizbara means you accepted the logic of Rabbi Yosef, and that's why you are asking a kash on me. So I think what we're about to learn in the next line or two of the Gemara is how Rabbi Yochanan is going to slug up the brilliant analysis of Rabbi Yosef. Let's see if I'm right about it. He says, "Achos chalutza d'oraisa." V'Amar Reish Lakish Kanshana Rebbe Achos Grusha midivrei Torah, but Achos chalutza midivrei Sofrim. I think I got it, but I don't got it. In other words, I have it in general, but I have to get to the specifics. So we're talking about achos chalutza, right? Achos chalutza. Right? We said that the chalutza, a second, chalutza. Does anybody have it yet? If you have it, just share it with us. Don't hold it for yourself. Achos chalutza, right? Right. We said that the tzar of the chalutza is. Tzar of the chalutza is an Eishes Ah, correct? She's go back to the Chiv Kares. So she's the tzara of the chalutza, and we're holding now like Reish Lakish. There's no shlichus, so she's not a tzara, and therefore she is a chiv kares. Okay, now we get to achos chalutza. What's the pshat of achos chalutza? Gave chalutza to who do we say? To Sarah, right? And now Sarah has a sister. What? It's the Rabbanon. All right, so this is what we're assuming all along. That Provas Chalutza is the Rabbanon. So the Achos Chalutza Dorai. But who said that Achos Chalutza is Dorai? Why is Rabbi Yochanan attacking? He's attacking that shita that Achos Chalutza is Dorai.
Is he asking a question? Is Achos Chalutza Daraisa? Asking the question.
Yeah, but Tisra means, like, are you telling me, right? The Tisra, he has the Tisra, he writes, V'chi hincha soven.
Well, because if it was a get, she would be us or but chalutza. Some similarities to the get is only.
Okay, I can accept that. But how are you weaving it into this sugya then? The Tisra is like a rhetorical question. The Tisra achos chalutza doraisa? I mean, you're attacking me because you are assuming that achos chalutza is doraisa. I don't remember that we made that assumption. That achos chalutza is doraisa. Did we? Achos chalutza.
I mean, it's one.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying. You're telling me you're equating get with chalutza, so then you're going to try and tell me that.
do me a favor, Steve. Go over one more time the kasha against Rabbi Yochanan. Let's go over the lot. I think
Right.
it'll be easier to understand how Rabbi Yochanan defends himself if we just review in our mind one more time the brilliant slug up or kasha that Rabbi Yosef asks. So again, our Mishnah says that he's allowed to marry the relatives of the tzara who did not get Yibum, correct? Right? Mutter odom bekrovas tzaras chalutzos. And that's against Rabbi Yochanan because, according to Rabbi Yochanan, they're all chalutzos. So there's no such thing as a tzaras chalutz in terms of your status as a chalutz. That was the kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. So now Rabbi Yochanan is saying that that's based on the assumption that achos chalutzaso is doraisa. It's like, if achos chalutzaso is doraisa, right? If achos chalutzaso is doraisa, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, all the tzaros are considered chalutzos. So then you have a kasha. How could the Mishnah allow him to marry a relative of the tzara of his chalut? Because she's also a chalut. But if I'm going to say that tzara, that achos chalutos is the Rabbanon, which apparently is a statement of Reish Lakish, that achos grusha is dvar Torah, but achos chalut is divrei sorim, right? So now Rabbanan said that we're going to equate chalut, like you said before, Steve, chalitza with get. So we're going to create an iser of achos chalutza bikatu achos grusha, right?
Right.
So he's saying the chalutza atzma gozru lesser es achos chalutza rasalo gozru. So he's saying, yeah, my opinion, says Rabbi Yochanan, is that they're all chalutzos. But that's only on a doraisa realm. Now we're going down to the Rabbanon. Why? Because the entire institution of achos chalutz of achos chalutzaso is the Rabbanan. So if the Rabbanan are creating this issue of achos chalutzaso, they could say only the chalutz. We don't have to. You follow what I mean? It's the conceptual principle that all the tsaros are chalutzos. That's only on a deraisa level. When it comes to the Rabbanan, or if you want to say it this way, that on a deraisa level, it all depends upon the chalos chalutz, and all the women, all the former wives of Reuben or whatever his name is, they all share the same. They all share the same. Whatchamacallit, the same status in terms of the chalos chalutz. Oh. Fine. Now you want to know about marrying the relatives of the chalutza. If I assume, like Reish Lakish, that whole problem, that whole enterprise is the Rabbanan, so Rabbanan, they're going to say it all depends on the Maisa Chalitza. Sarah had the Maisa Chalitza. Rivka didn't have the Maisa Chalitza. And if Rivka didn't have the Maisa Chalitza, then the Rabbanan are not going to go that step further and say what? And say that you can't marry the relatives of the Chalutza. Which again, we're holding is the Rabbanan, because that's Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish holds the Rabbanan. Hooray, ein Yisra achos Chalutza el mi Rabbanan. Ubechalutza atzma gazru lesser es achosna. So if the whole institution of achos chalutza is the Rabbanan, which again, I don't think that's shocking to us, then b'tzarasa lo gazer. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan is saying you are guilty, Rabbi Yosef, of equating Dorais and Rabbanan. You're saying that if on a Dorais level they're all chalutzos, then also vis-a-vis the Rabbanan of achos chalutza, we're going to have to assume that achos chalutza is asura in all the tzaros, all the Yevamos, because they're all chalutzos. No, that's not so. When the Rabbanan made the gzera, they made the gzera on the chalutza. She's like the grusha. But tzarasa lo gazu. Even though on a deraisa level, I maintain, says Rabbi Yochanan, that tzara is also a chalutza. But ein achos asura, in kegesh lomer shachalutza choletzes b'shlichus hatzaros. I would add midoraisa. That's what I would add to the Masechet. The af hein einon omdos, right? So that's the kula of Rabbi Yochanan, that the other tzaros, like for example Rivka, are not included in Eishes Ach with the Chi of Kares because they too are chalutza. So when you get to the chalutza, you downgrade the avera, the erva, to a lav of lo yibne. The asur is rak the lav shelo yibne. I didn't cheat. I could have written that text. But but even though she, the choletzes, is operating according to Rabbi Yochanan on behalf of all the tzaros, and they're all chalutzos, and therefore the Isur Lav vis-a-vis the chalutza and all the other Yevamos that are also chalutzos is only an Isur Lav and not a Chi of Kares, because of Imlo Yivneh. But nevertheless, when you get down to the, down into the pit, the ditch of the Rabbanans, you're getting your feet into the Rabbanans, that's a whole different story. The Rabbanan said that Achos Chalutzaso is Asura because she received the Maisa Chalitza, but not the other Yevamos. Okay, then that's where we get up to. Whew.
Well, so it's not the other tzarot that would be mutar as well. Not it's only their proba who would be to marry, but not the tzar, the other tzar.
The relatives of the other tzaros
Would be
mutaros. That's on the
but what about the other tzar?
The tzara herself is paradoxically, according to Rabbi Yochanan, she downgrades from an Isur Eshesach Kares down to the level of an Isur Lav. Because she's also a chalutza.
No,
And again, except for Rabbi Akiva, but
No, Isulav is not.
right, except for Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the only one who says Yisrael generates Mamzeros. Maishna High is where we got up to. That's Mamish at the end of the Okay, gentlemen, so I wish you a great day. So much.